I feel like I'm going to crack. My fiancé and I recently got engaged not too long ago. While we were making plans, deciding on rings and so on, the proposal was very spontaneous and happened months before my fiancé had originally planned. I also originally planned to accept his proposal in his native language. However, due to events that led up to the proposal, I forgot. So I decided I would just keep taking classes, plus his brother or brother's wife will only converse with me in Polish when my fiancé isn't around. Then I would surprise my fiancé by giving my vows in Polish. The problem? My fiancé doesn't know I now understand a lot of the conversations he's having with his family and some of his friends because I have to pretend I don't understand. This has been going on for months even before he proposed. I feel like I'm invading his privacy. Cause now I know, he has been planning to surprise me with his originally planned proposal, but now it's just an over-the-top engagement party. He once told his mom he missed her sauerkraut soup, so, for the almost 5 years we have been together, I make this dish a handful of times a year during fall/winter for him. I had called his mom up for the specific recipe too. Turns out he has always hated it. But it reminds him of home and his mom and sees how happy I get to make this for him, so he just eats it. Like I make a big pot only for him to eat and I don't like sauerkraut. Now it makes sense why he always sends half of it to his brother and sister-in-law, who lives walking distance from us. He has been hiding my favorite candies around the house. For the last 2 years. I will find my favorite candies in places I was surprised to find them in. Like a random drawer here. On a shelf there. Like I get so happy and will run to him in my excitement about these random candies I must have forgotten about. Nope. He just buys bags of them and will place them in spots randomly. He just loves how excited I get. I caught him telling his brother when his brother found one of them going through one of our kitchen drawers. His brother thought the whole situation was hilarious cause he's in on the fact that I understood the whole exchange. He has my period in his calendar so that he can be extra mindful plus get me my favorite things during the week to help keep my mood up. He has always known that I lied about being a morning person. I said that when we first started dating because he always went to the gym in the morning and would invite me to go with him. 4/5 years later, we still go to the gym together and, while getting up at 5 a.m. is still a pain for me, it's worth spending that extra time with him especially since we are both busy people. Turns out if I fall asleep before him, he has trouble sleeping. I snore, I've tried everything. He has never once complained to me about it, but I still use nasal strips and have a special pillow that I thought helped. However, apparently if I fall asleep after him, he can just sleep through it cause he's a heavy sleeper. So now I make it a point to sleep after him. He hasn't caught on yet, I think. The last thing is something that he has told anyone who will listen. His parents. His uncles. His aunts. His brother. His brother's wife. His friends in Poland. Anyone and everyone who speaks Polish. If I'm in the room and he's on the phone with them, he will always look at me with a crazy big smile and tell them that he cannot wait to marry me. Ugh. I love the man so much. I don't think I can keep this charade up for a year. We are planning for a 2024 wedding. I am not good at pretending. I can't keep hiding my face or running out of the room when he is talking to family/friends. And my birthday will be coming up in a few months, so I know he will be planning something and probably think it's safe to talk about it with some people in Polish. I'm going to crack soon. I can feel it. What is the worst thing you have caught a family member doing? I caught my husband, 26 male, getting head from my 14-year-old sister. My husband and I were over at my mom's house today, where my little sister stays. We were in the kitchen talking about how my sister pierced her ears at home without any ice, and pushed the needle right through her ear. My sister goes, "I don't know, the pain felt kinda good," and chuckled leaving the room. After she leaves, my husband goes, "I bet she'd love rough intimacy," and laughs. I'm frankly appalled at this point. Fast forward a few hours and my sister starts name-calling my husband over text in a playful way. They start name-calling each other back and forth over text. She called him a little pee-pee beach, he says, "Seek sucker." I leave the room to go to the bathroom, and when I come back in, I heard her say at least if I had a wife I'd make her finish. He laughs and says, "You'll have to ask my wife about that." And continues to engage in this weird sexualized conversation. The whole thing really rubbed me the wrong way. The name-calling seemed to turn intimate fast and it felt off to me. The next time we went over, the both got straight back into it, even around my mother. While we were playing Monopoly, my sister needed to pay her rent, to him. So he says, "Ha ha, kiss my SS," and she playfully responded, "Well, you can slap mine," with a wink as she passes the money to my husband. So my husband literally did. In front of my mom. From here on out it started to get worse. But it was turning physical. When we went home I said to him that I didn't like how my sister and him were getting physical. But he proceeded to brush it off, and just talk about her as if they were dating. Later that week while I was attending a girls' night, I remembered I forgot my new pukaline necklace that I wanted to show off to my friends, so I went back home and through the window I could see my husband and little sister play fighting. I wanted to see where this was going, so I silently crouched and watched the scene unfold. I could slightly hear their voices, and my little sister was arguing that she bet she could make him nut in under 30 seconds. My husband, apparently being overly competitive, immature person and apparently child pedo as well, stripped down and said deal. I immediately ran through the front door, but it was too late. My sister was giving my husband head, and I guess I'm looking for advice or opinions on if what I felt was valid or not. When the teacher wrote "see me after class" on your paper, what did they say to you? From the other side of the desk. I once wrote "see me after class" on an exam paper I handed back to a student in a university intro bio class I was teaching. It was in the South shortly after 9/11, and based on his name and appearance, the young man was obviously East Asian or Middle Eastern. He had also done an outstanding job on the exam, for the second or third time. He seemed a bit of a loner and I just wanted to check in with him, see if he was okay and be a friendly face. I told him it was obvious that he was not a local southern boy, that I suspected he was from a part of the world that was not particularly popular in the area and that I hoped he was doing okay. He told me that the treatment that he was getting was nothing compared to what he received in his homeland, that he was a Baha'i from Iran and left his country to avoid all the religious persecution. I congratulated him on his excellent performance in my class and asked about his other classes and goals. He said he was getting A's in all his other classes and hoped to become an engineer. The university where I was teaching is a good school and strong in some areas. However, it was not particularly strong in the applied physical sciences and engineering. I suggested he consider transferring to a school where he would be more challenged. When he asked me where, I said, University of Chicago, Stanford, Princeton, MIT, someplace like that. I am not an engineer but tried to name off a few schools that I thought would be good. Several months later, he emailed me, telling me that he had taken my advice, checked all those schools and found that MIT was the only one that would accept transfers at that time. Would I write a letter of recommendation for him? The young man had done what I suggested, so I had no choice but to support him. Now, I am a pro at lures and wrote one of my killer's letters of recommendation for him. I shot straight but included all the info I would want to see if I were on the other end, telling what I knew of the young man, the nature of our relationship and my opinion of his abilities and performance, all with factual examples. I concluded by saying if they were half as smart as I thought they were, they would take him into their program. A while after that, he contacted me to say that he was transferring to MIT. Several years later I did a Google search on his name and found that he had received a master's in electrical engineering from MIT. Some see me after class notes may lead to dark places, but most are written to get a better understanding of a situation. I tend to think that they indicate that an instructor/teacher cares enough about the situation to try to resolve it. I was fortunate to have had some really excellent mentors and have tried to honor them. I also respected my students. Most were in school because they wanted an education. Some took my classes because they had to, others because they wanted to. Some faced major obstacles in their lives, including rather weak educational foundations. Still, most came and tried. This is one of several that stands out. Teacher, have you ever caught your students doing something inappropriate? I teach at a Catholic middle school, so our standards for appropriate behavior are pretty high. Technically, a student telling another student to shut up counts as inappropriate for us, and I'd have to discipline that student if I heard it. The most inappropriate thing I've ever caught a student doing, that would be inappropriate even by public school standards, happened about 5 years ago. I was proctoring a standardized test near the end of the school year. All of the 8th graders had already been accepted into their high schools, and they just didn't care about the standardized test or anything else having to do with school at that point. This particular test session was an hour long, and students were not allowed to read a book or draw or do anything else once they were finished with their tests. The idea is to prevent students from rushing through the test to get back to a book they're reading. The 8th graders rushed through the test anyway, because they just didn't care. One student literally put his name on his paper and turned it in with all of the answers blank. He'd been a discipline problem for the 2 years I taught him, and I was happy he was about to move on to high school. He turned in his answer sheet before I even sat down from passing out everyone's tests, smiled at me, returned to his seat, and put his head on his desk. I wasn't allowed to say anything to him or encourage him to try harder or anything. He asked if he could sit in an unoccupied corner seat for the rest of the time, and I agreed. I was happy he was taking a nap and wasn't going to distract others. Or so I thought. About 15 minutes later, as I was walking around, monitoring everyone else who was still taking the test, I looked in his direction. His head was down and his hoodie was pulled over his head, but there was no mistaking what was going on. He was wearing sweatpants, and his hand was down them. He was playing with himself in the back of the classroom during a standardized test. I didn't want to make a scene, because I didn't want to disturb the students who were focused on the test. I had two options: tell him to stop, and risk him making a scene. Ignore it and tell his parents later. I went with option 2. After the test, I emailed the parents and CC'd my boss, explaining exactly what had happened with him not doing the test, and what he did afterwards. The mother apologized. My boss said I did the right thing. The kid didn't look me in the eyes for the next 3 weeks I taught him. What's the worst mistake you ever made when texting someone? So, I know a girl, she's 15, and I'm not quite sure what she has, but I do know she's mentally challenged. She's the sweetest little girl I know, heart of gold and extremely generous, and friendly. She's taken quite a liking to me, and her parents say she apparently doesn't stop talking about me at the dinner table, or whenever she gets the chance. I think she sees me the same way younger kids find high schoolers cool. She's recently taken an interest in building her own wardrobe. She didn't care much aside from preferring certain colors and prints, and her mother apparently bought most things for her, but she's begun to develop her own taste fashion-wise. That said, I have several pairs of baggy pants I usually default to for comfort, and she noticed. She expressed to her mother that she wanted her own pair, but she wanted it to look exactly like my pants specifically. Now, baggy pants often have different looking fits depending on its dimensions and whoever's wearing them, and after hours of her mother taking her to different shops, they weren't able to find one that looked just like mine did, and fitted on her exactly like mine did. Lisa decided to send me a message once they reached the last shop, and she told me what she was doing. I go, I'll help. Like the dumb F that I am. God, if I could just ask to turn back time, I would have tossed my phone and myself down a whale's colon in the hopes that would save me from the day's humiliation. But as we are all just men, I was powerless. She found one that looked quite similar to mine, and she tried it on. She then sent me a picture of herself smiling and wearing the pants, but she told me she was still upset as it doesn't look as good as when you wear it. Alright, that's lovely. She's trying to copy me? Very sweet of her. Unfortunately, I was busy when she messaged me. Not too busy not to be able to check my phone every now and then, but I definitely couldn't be on my phone for too long. So, I took a look at the picture she sent and decided it wasn't baggy enough and she had pulled the pair far too high up her waist. Again, I couldn't type for too long. I deliberately kept my responses short. I responded, bigger. Pull it down a little too, waistband should be around your belly button, perfect, right? Wonderful advice from a guy she thinks is cool. But no, of course not. I placed my phone back into my pocket, happy with myself. I thought about wearing the pants that matched the color of what she had tried on when we meet again. But God is not merciful. In fact, God has forsaken us all. The second message never sent. Bigger, it's a single word and it sounds dry and uninterested. But surely sounding dry and uninterested in a conversation with a mentally stunted girl isn't too much of a sin, right? That wasn't my sin, unfortunately. And it's probably time I should mention Lisa is a black girl. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please open your keyboards and spot the letter B with me. It's on the lower right side, correct? Lovely. How wonderful is it that the letter N is also on the lower right side? Why, the letters are right next to each other. Surely, there is not a word that could be sabotaged by that simple little mistake? Well, there is. So I called Lisa the N-word. Hard are perfectly spelled. Students, what is the saddest thing you found out about your teacher? In sophomore year, I had a math teacher named Mr. Big. He was famous at my school because of how short he was, which you didn't always realize until you stood up from your desk. Kids used to jokingly refer to him as Mr. Big. He didn't assign too much work and he was a really nice guy, so most students liked him. However, some students took advantage of his kindness and would mess with him in class, as he seemed like an easy target. I was one of those kids, and one day we pushed him too far. He was my Algebra 2 teacher in my sophomore year. I was ahead in math, so the rest of my class were all juniors. I was very insecure at that time, as I hadn't quite hit puberty yet, and I desperately wanted the approval of the older kids in my class. The one thing I had going for me was that I was smart. Like really smart. But being good in school was not really that cool at the time, so I used my intellect for another purpose, to make fun of people. I couldn't always defend myself physically, so my defense mechanism I built up was an extraordinary ability to make people feel stupid and small using my words. I would study people and learn their insecurities, and store them away for if they ever crossed me or made me mad. For Mr. Big, while he was obviously insecure about his height, I learned pretty early on that his biggest insecurity was control. He made kids raise their hands to go to the bathroom, was super strict about his assigned seating, and he never let students stand up without asking him first. He loved being in his classroom, because there, he was in control of the situation. So I decided to take that away from him. One day, me and the three guys at my table in class started humming. We hummed as low as we possibly could, which made it impossible for Mr. Big to tell where it was coming from. At first, he laughed, and said, "Okay, very funny. Can whoever is doing that please stop so we can continue with the lesson?" We stopped for a few minutes, but then we started up again. Now Mr. Big was agitated. He whipped around, trying to catch the culprits, but he couldn't tell because we made sure to keep normal expressions as we hummed. "Guys, this isn't funny anymore, whoever is humming needs to stop now." I could see his lip twitching, the urgency in his voice, and the look of insecurity in his eyes. It was working. Nothing made me feel better about myself than seeing someone else unravel right in front of me. He tried once again to return to teaching, but he could not ignore the low, buzzing sound of us humming. He turned around again, and this time hysterically screamed, "Just stop. Stop the humming. Whoever is humming, just please stop." He had completely lost his composure, and you could see the signs of anxiety all over him. Heavy breathing, beads of visible sweat on his brow, and his entire body shaking a little. Then he looked up, and saw a room full of teenagers snickering under their breath, or covering their mouths. I think that sight was what broke him. In an instant, the layers of protection he had been building up his entire life were stripped away, and the parts of himself he hated the most were bare for everyone to see. Then he started crying. Why? Why doesn't anyone take me seriously? I was ridiculed my entire childhood, and I thought that if I returned as a teacher I would finally be respected. But now, as a fully grown man, I'm being laughed at by a bunch of teenagers. Why? Is this why I'm alone? Is this why they all leave? Why doesn't anyone respect me? Nobody was laughing anymore. He stood there quietly for what felt like an eternity, and then left, saying he had to go to the bathroom. He didn't come back for the rest of class, and the vice principal had to come in and take over. They told us some story about how he wasn't feeling well, but everyone had just seen what had happened. He came back after 2 days, and taught the class for the rest of the year, but he was different. He did the bare minimum, and I didn't see him smile a single time for the rest of the year. It was like he had just given up. He stopped caring if kids went to the bathroom without asking, or sat in the wrong spot, or stood up to walk around class. I had shattered his classroom paradise into little pieces, and he wasn't interested in putting the pieces back together. As for me, I wish I could say that this was a big turning point in my life, and I never did anything like that again, but I would be lying if I said it was. Sure, watching a grown man cry in front of me did make me feel guilty, but that feeling was wiped away the first time one of the older kids said, "Dude, that humming thing with Mr. Bick was hilarious." I continued to walk around with hate in my heart, and hurt a lot of people who were close to me in the process. It didn't dawn on me until much later that I was worthy of love all by myself, and didn't need to put others down to feel big. Wherever you are, I'm sorry, Mr. Bick. I tried to stop what I thought was a prank at my friend's wedding. My friend, Ashley, got married last night to her longtime partner, Kevin. Kevin's best friend, Frank. He's a bit of a prankster and it's usually all in good fun. Ashley has shared there are times that Frank goes a little too far to stir the pot, but he had promised to be on his best behavior for the wedding. I had agreed to help deal with Ashley's boundary stomping family as well as look out for any pranks that Frank might pull. Even though we knew he said he'd be good, we know Frank. Ashley and Kevin are big football fans. At one point in the night, they wanted the wedding party to don 49ers jerseys they purchased to get a few photos in. Frank is also a football fan, but is diehard for the Chiefs. There's always been some banter back and forth between Ashley and Frank over this. In the beginning, Ashley said he was refusing to wear the jersey she bought. Eventually, he gave in and said it was just 5 minutes, so no big deal. He did keep cracking jokes that he'd show up in a Chiefs jersey and Ashley always said with a serious face, "Yeah, no, don't you dare." So, I was to assume that hey, he's not wearing it. The time came for the wedding party to put on our jerseys over our dresses/suits. The wedding party went upstairs. As I'm waiting with the other bridesmaids, I see Frank come out of the bathroom in a Chiefs jersey. I asked what he was doing. He smirked and said it was all good. I told him to go change. Again, he repeated it was all good and he had permission. Considering Ashley hadn't told me and it wouldn't be out of Frank's wheelhouse to try to pull one over on me, I said no, she didn't. Why are you trying to cause problems on her wedding day? That's when Kevin came out of the room he and Ashley were getting ready in and asked what was going on. Frank said she doesn't believe me. Kevin seemed to have a lightning bulb moment and was like, "Oh, yeah, we meant to tell you that Ashley agreed it. Was fine for him to wear the jersey, they have some cool poses planned." I said alright, apologized to Frank for the misunderstanding and moved on. I think the pictures will turn out great. After Kevin and Ashley left, I stayed behind to help clean up some stuff. Frank approached me and said I was a drama queen for making a big deal about the jersey. I said I had no clue Ashley gave him permission and given his history of antagonizing people/playing pranks, I thought it was a fair assumption. He said it was none of my business. I pointed out that I had been put in charge of making sure he didn't pull any pranks, which he knew. Still, he told me that I should have minded my own business. We haven't bothered Ashley and Kevin with this and I have no plans to. However, it got around some of our friends and they're split. Some say I was in the right given Frank's past. Others say I was being controlling and dramatic. Am I the a-hole? Am I the a-hole for leaving my ex homeless? My ex and I are 29 years old and had been dating since we were in high school. We were in the midst of planning our wedding up until 2 weeks ago when I found out she was having an affair. One day when my ex was out I noticed her dad had been spamming her with messages that showed up on her Apple Watch. I got curious wondering if something might have been wrong so I decided to check the messages and that's when I realized it wasn't her dad. The messages were full of some guy expressing how excited he was to hook up with her later that night. She had named the guy she was cheating on me with dad on her watch in order to hide suspicion and he had just blown her cover with his excitement. Before she got home I decided to hide the watch and when she got back she began searching for it, asking me if I'd seen it to which I responded cluelessly, telling her I hadn't seen it all day and assumed she took it with her. I then purposely started becoming distant and she noticed. She started panicking, texting her best friend, telling her all about how she lost her watch and how I've been acting distant. She was worried I might have found out about her affair. Her best friend had the decency to message me later on in the day, warning me that my ex was having an affair and that she'd be confessing to me in a few weeks. I told her that I already knew because I had her watch and I was watching the messages roll in. I also told her that I would be getting my revenge by the end of the month. Her friend said if I needed someone to lean on, she was always there and that she'd be willing to help me execute my revenge. A few weeks went by and our apartment lease was finally up so I started packing everything. I also took all my money from our shared account. I woke up early the next day to throw all my stuff in my car and waited for her to get home so she could confess about her affair. When she did I nodded and left without saying a word. As she was chasing after me asking where I was going, I said nothing and hopped into my car getting ready to drive myself over to my brother's for the night. I woke up today to multiple messages and voicemails about why rent wasn't paid and why there was someone telling her she needed to leave. She had also decided to message my family, telling them all that she's homeless because of me and called me an a-hole. Nearly all my siblings and father agreed that she deserved what I did except for my sister and my mother. They also called me an a-hole for leaving her stranded and for taking half the money out of the account but the only thing I took was the money I made. They said I should have tried to work things and my mother even messaged me privately telling me that my fiancée was starting to have thoughts of ending her life, and that if I didn't take her back then she was going to disown me and cut me out of the will. I told her my ex was no longer my problem and if she really was homeless then she could go live with that guy she destroyed our 13-year relationship for. Am I the a-hole for ditching this cheater?